The entire Joint Base Andrews fell silent when Staff Sergeant Maya "Ghost" Rodriguez stepped forward and took command of the F-22 Raptor. General Harrison froze, his jaw dropping as he realized the unassuming mechanic he'd dismissed all week was about to execute the most dangerous rescue mission in recent Air Force history. Every airman in the hangar snapped to attention, saluting the scarred woman they had mocked just hours earlier in the mess hall. The call sign "Ghost" alone made seasoned pilots step back in reverence. It belonged to the most decorated female combat pilot in Air Force Special Operations, a legend whispered about in ready rooms from Afghanistan to Iraq. As Maya's gloved hands moved across the Raptor's controls with surgical precision, her voice crackled through the comm system. "Tower, this is Ghost. Requesting immediate departure for Operation Lifeline. 2 Marines down behind enemy lines, wounded and surrounded. Time is not our friend today. But to understand how we got here, how a woman eating alone in the corner became the base's salvation, I need to take you back to the beginning, to 5 days earlier, when everything started with a transfer order and a pile of misconceptions." Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez arrived at Joint Base Andrews on a gray Monday morning in October, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a manila envelope containing her transfer orders clutched in her weathered hands. The base stretched out before her like a small city, endless runways cutting through manicured grass, hangars housing billion-dollar aircraft, and administrative buildings buzzing with the controlled chaos of military life. General Harrison stood waiting in his office, dress blues immaculate, ribbons perfectly aligned across his broad chest. At 58, he commanded respect through presence alone. 6'3", silver hair cropped regulation short, and eyes that had seen 3 decades of Air Force operations. When Maya knocked and entered, his expression shifted from expectation to barely concealed disappointment. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reporting for duty, sir," Maya said, snapping a crisp salute. She stood 5'6", lean but strong, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face bore the telltale signs of combat, a thin scar running from her left temple to her jaw, another across the bridge of her nose, and hands that showed countless hours working with tools and weapons. "At ease, Rodriguez," Harrison muttered, scanning her file with growing confusion. "Says here you're being assigned to aircraft maintenance, crew chief position on the F-22 squadron." He looked up, studying her scars with obvious concern. "You sure you're up for this kind of work? These birds are worth $150 million each. We can't afford mistakes." "Yes, sir. I'm ready to serve wherever needed," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the dismissive tone. Harrison's aide, Captain Mitchell, whispered something about diversity quotas just loud enough for Maya to hear. The general didn't correct him. Instead, he handed Maya her assignment papers with the enthusiasm of someone passing along a parking ticket. "Report to Hangar 7. Master Sergeant Coleman will show you the ropes. Try not to get in the way of the real mechanics," Harrison said, already turning his attention to other paperwork. As Maya walked across the tarmac toward Hangar 7, she passed clusters of airmen who stopped their conversations to stare. The whispers followed her like a shadow, questions about her scars, speculation about her competence, and barely veiled assumptions that she was there to fill some bureaucratic requirement, rather than contribute meaningfully. Master Sergeant Coleman, a bear of a man with oil-stained hands and 30 years of aircraft experience, greeted her with skeptical professionalism. "Rodriguez, right? Well, these F-22s aren't your average birds. Stealth coding alone requires specialized training. You ever worked on anything more complex than a Humvee?" "I'll learn quickly, Sergeant," Maya replied, already examining the nearest Raptor with eyes that missed nothing. The angle of the engine intakes, the precise alignment of the control surfaces, the subtle seams in the radar-absorbing skin. Nobody knew that Maya Rodriguez had more flight hours in F-22s than most of the pilots on base. Nobody knew that her call sign "Ghost" was earned through 43 combat missions over hostile territory, or that she held the Air Force Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire. The scars they whispered about came from ejecting over enemy territory and walking 18 miles through Taliban-controlled mountains to reach friendly forces. For now, she was content to let them underestimate her. Maya had learned long ago that assumptions could be weapons, and she preferred to keep her sharpest tools hidden until the moment they were needed most. Over the next 3 days, Maya worked quietly in Hangar 7, her hands moving across F-22 components, with an expertise that gradually caught the attention of observant personnel. She diagnosed engine irregularities that had stumped other mechanics for weeks, spotted stress fractures in wing assemblies that senior staff had missed, and completed routine maintenance checks in half the expected time. Tech Sergeant Barnes, a veteran crew chief with 15 years on the flight line, found himself watching Maya work with growing curiosity. "How'd you know that fuel pump was failing?" he asked one afternoon, after Maya had identified a problem that wouldn't have shown symptoms for another week. "Sound was off by about 20 RPMs during startup," Maya replied without looking up from her checklist. "Plus the fuel flow indicator was fluctuating in a specific pattern. Classic sign of impeller wear." Barnes exchanged glances with his team. That level of diagnostic skill typically took years to develop, yet Maya had been on base for 72 hours. Meanwhile, General Harrison's irritation grew with each positive report about the new transfer. During his morning briefings, he found himself hearing Maya's name more often than he cared to, always in the context of problems solved, improvements made, or insights shared. Captain Mitchell continued feeding his suspicions with comments about overachieving to prove herself, and probably had help from someone. The tension reached a boiling point during Thursday's base-wide training exercise. Maya was assigned to pre-flight inspection duties while the pilots prepared for combat simulation runs. As F-22 screamed overhead in formation, she worked methodically through her checklist, each movement precise and economical. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, one of the squadron's most experienced pilots, noticed Maya's body language as the aircraft performed high-G maneuvers above. "You fly?" Chen asked during a brief lull in operations. "Not anymore, ma'am," Maya replied, her eyes tracking the Raptors with the instinctive precision of someone who understood their capabilities intimately. "But you did fly. I can tell by how you watch them, like you're still in the cockpit." Chen studied Maya's scarred face with new interest. "What did you fly?" Before Maya could answer, Master Sergeant Coleman called her over to inspect an engine that had developed unusual vibrations. As she disappeared into the hangar, Chen made a mental note to check the transfer records more carefully. That evening in the mess hall, Maya sat alone as usual, methodically eating her dinner while conversations swirled around her. At a nearby table, a group of maintenance staff debated the finer points of F-22 avionics systems, their discussion growing heated as they disagreed about sensor integration protocols. The AN/APG-77 radar can track multiple targets simultaneously, but the data fusion algorithms sometimes create false positives during electronic countermeasure scenarios, declared Sergeant Williams, the base's supposed electronics expert. Maya winced slightly at the technical inaccuracy but continued eating in silence. Williams was describing outdated software from 3 generations ago. The current systems had solved those integration issues years earlier. She'd personally helped test the solutions during her time with Air Force Special Operations Command. The conversation continued with increasing misinformation, each airman trying to outdo the others with technical knowledge they'd gleaned from manuals rather than experience. Maya's jaw tightened as they discussed radar cross-section reduction techniques they fundamentally misunderstood, stealth capabilities they'd never utilized, and combat scenarios they'd never faced. Lieutenant Colonel Chen watched from across the room, noting Maya's obvious familiarity with the topics being butchered by the self-proclaimed experts. Something wasn't adding up about the quiet staff sergeant with the 1,000-yard stare and the hands that moved like a surgeon's when she worked on aircraft. Later that night, Chen made a secure call to Personnel Command. "I need complete service records for Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, recently transferred to Andrews. Something tells me we're not getting the whole story on this one." The response would take 24 hours to process through classified channels, but Chen had a growing suspicion that Maya Rodriguez wasn't just another mechanic looking for steady work. The way she'd analyzed those F-22 maneuvers suggested someone who'd flown them in combat, not someone who'd learned about them in technical school. As Maya walked back to her quarters, passing beneath the floodlights that illuminated the flight line, she caught sight of 2 F-22s being prepped for a night training mission. Her fingers unconsciously traced the ejection seat scars along her ribs, reminders of the last time she'd trusted her life to one of those magnificent machines. Tomorrow would bring the crisis that would shatter every assumption the base had made about her. Tonight, she was still just the scarred woman they laughed at in the showers, the mechanic they tolerated rather than respected. Friday morning erupted in chaos when the emergency klaxon shattered the dawn quiet at 0547 hours. Maya was already in Hangar 7, performing pre-dawn maintenance checks, when Captain Mitchell's voice crackled over the base-wide communication system. All personnel, code red emergency. 2 Marines down behind enemy lines, grid coordinates classified, immediate extraction required. General Harrison burst into the operations center, his uniform hastily thrown over sleep clothes, demanding a full briefing from the duty officer. The situation was catastrophic. A Marine reconnaissance team had been compromised during a classified operation in hostile territory. 2 Marines were critically wounded, pinned down by enemy fire, with a rapidly closing window for extraction. "Sir, we need an F-22 for close air support and reconnaissance," reported Major Stevens, the operations officer. "The terrain is too hot for conventional rescue birds, and we need stealth capability to avoid surface-to-air missiles." Harrison's face went pale. The base's 2 most experienced F-22 pilots were on leave, and the remaining pilots lacked the specialized training for this type of high-risk rescue mission. The wounded Marines had perhaps 2 hours before their injuries became fatal, and every minute spent in planning reduced their chances of survival. "What about Lieutenant Colonel Chen?" Harrison asked desperately. "Sir, she's qualified for the mission profile, but she's been grounded for the past 72 hours with an inner ear infection. Flight surgeon's orders. Vertigo makes her a liability in the cockpit." The silence was deafening as the weight of impossible choices settled over the room. Harrison stared at the tactical display showing friendly forces surrounded by hostile territory, knowing that bureaucracy and bad timing might cost 2 Marines their lives. Maya had been listening from the hangar doorway, her maintenance clipboard forgotten in her hands. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the desperate discussions with quiet authority. "Sir, I can fly the mission." Every head in the operations center turned toward her with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright anger. Captain Mitchell actually laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "A mechanic? Rodriguez, this isn't a video game. This is an F-22 Raptor conducting combat operations." "I'm qualified, sir," Maya replied, her eyes locked on General Harrison's. "I can bring those Marines home." Harrison's face flushed red with anger and frustration. "Staff Sergeant, I do not know what kind of flight simulator experience you think qualifies you for." "General," Maya interrupted, something dangerous flashing in her dark eyes. "Those Marines are dying while we debate. I have over 800 hours in F-22s, including 43 combat missions. I know the terrain, I know the threat profile, and I know how to bring people home alive." The operations center fell silent except for the urgent chatter of radio communications coordinating the failing rescue attempt. Harrison studied Maya's face, seeing something he'd missed before, the absolute confidence of someone who'd faced death and won, repeatedly. "Prove it," he said finally. Maya moved to the tactical planning station, her hands flying across the touchscreen display as she analyzed the mission parameters with surgical precision. Target area is mountainous terrain, approximately 8,000 feet elevation, natural SAM umbrella from portable Stinger missiles. We go in low and fast, using terrain masking to avoid detection. Her fingers traced flight paths across the digital map, with the fluidity of someone who'd flown these routes before. Primary approach vector from the northwest, following this ridgeline to mask radar signature. Close air support to suppress enemy positions, then establish overwatch for helicopter extraction. Major Stevens leaned forward, his skepticism wavering as Maya detailed tactical considerations he hadn't thought of. "How do you know about the portable missile threat?" "Because I've been shot at by them before," Maya replied quietly. "Stinger missiles have a specific engagement envelope. Stay below 500 feet until the final approach. Use terrain features for concealment, and they can't achieve target lock." She pulled up weapons systems interfaces on the planning computer, configuring attack profiles with the speed of someone intimately familiar with every switch and display. 20mm cannon for precision strikes, AIM-120 missiles on standby for air-to-air threats, and chaff dispensers ready for defensive countermeasures. General Harrison watched this transformation with growing amazement. The quiet mechanic had vanished, replaced by someone who spoke the language of air combat with native fluency. Her scarred hands moved across controls like a concert pianist, every gesture economical and purposeful. "Sir," Maya said, turning from the tactical display to face Harrison directly. "Those Marines have maybe 90 minutes left. Every second we spend questioning my credentials is a second closer to body bags instead of rescue." For the first time in his 30-year career, General Harrison found himself taking orders from a staff sergeant. "Get her suited up," he commanded. "Maya Rodriguez, you have the mission." As Maya strode toward the flight line in full combat gear, her helmet tucked under her arm, Lieutenant Colonel Chen caught up with her, breathless from running across the tarmac. "Maya, wait. I got your service records back from Personnel Command." Maya paused at the base of the F-22's ladder, her hand resting on the aircraft's stealth coating. "And?" "Air Force Cross for Extraordinary Heroism. Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters. Purple Heart. 43 combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq with Air Force Special Operations Command." Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Call sign Ghost. You're the Maya Rodriguez, the pilot who flew into Kandahar province alone to extract a surrounded Special Forces team, the one who took surface-to-air missile damage and still completed the mission." Maya's expression remained calm as she began her pre-flight inspection, but her hands trembled slightly as she checked control surfaces. "That was a long time ago, Colonel." "The scars," Chen continued, pieces falling into place. "From the ejection over Taliban territory, you walked 18 miles through enemy lines with a broken arm and 2 cracked ribs." 19 miles, Maya corrected quietly. "But who's counting?" By now, a crowd had gathered around the F-22, word spreading through the base like wildfire. Master Sergeant Coleman stood with his maintenance crew, their faces showing the dawning realization that they'd been working alongside a legend. Tech Sergeant Barnes shook his head in amazement, remembering how Maya had diagnosed problems that had stumped him for weeks. General Harrison approached, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by something approaching awe. "Staff Sergeant, excuse me, Ghost. Why didn't you tell us who you were?" Maya paused in her pre-flight checks, considering the question. "Because rank and reputation don't fix broken aircraft, sir. Because medals don't make someone a better mechanic. And because sometimes people need to earn respect through actions, not through stories about the past." She climbed into the cockpit, her body settling into the ejection seat with the familiarity of coming home. As she ran through startup procedures, her voice came through the comm system with the crisp professionalism of a combat veteran. "Tower, this is Ghost requesting immediate departure for Operation Lifeline. 2 friendlies down. Time critical extraction." The entire base watched as the F-22 taxied to the runway, its engines painting heat waves across the morning air. General Harrison stood at attention, his salute held high as the Raptor accelerated down the center line, defying gravity with the graceful power that had made it the world's premier air superiority fighter. "Ghost is airborne." Maya's voice crackled through the speakers. "En route to target area, 2 Marines are coming home today." As the F-22 disappeared into the morning sky, leaving only contrails and the thunder of afterburners, the base fell into respectful silence. Nobody would ever again mistake Maya Rodriguez for just another mechanic. The scars they'd mocked told stories of courage beyond their comprehension, and the quiet woman they'd dismissed was about to prove that legends don't retire. They just wait for the moment when heroes are needed most. 97 minutes later, Maya's voice would crackle through the comm system one final time. "Tower, this is Ghost returning home. Package delivered safely. 2 Marines alive and en route to medical." The mission that had seemed impossible became another line in her service record, another story whispered in ready rooms about the pilot they called Ghost. The woman who could appear from nowhere when lives hung in the balance, then disappear back into the shadows of ordinary duty. But that morning, watching her aircraft climb toward the horizon, everyone at Joint Base Andrews learned that sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in the most ordinary places, waiting for the moment when their true calling demands they step from the shadows and remind the world what heroism looks like.